Lincoln Cathedral. Lincoln Cathedral, Lincoln Minster, or the Cathedral Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Lincoln, and sometimes St. Mary's Cathedral in Lincoln, England, is a Grade 1 listed cathedral and is the seat of the Anglican Bishop of Lincoln. Construction commenced in 1072 and continued in several phases throughout the High Middle Ages. Like many of the medieval cathedrals of England, it was built in the early Gothic style. Although considered doubtful by some, many historians claim it became the tallest building in the world upon the completion of its 160 meters, 520 feet high central spire in 1311. If so, it was the first building to hold that title after the Great Pyramid of Giza, and held it for 238 years until the spire collapsed in 1548 and was not rebuilt. Had the central spire remained intact, Lincoln Cathedral would have remained the world's tallest structure until the completion of the Washington Monument in 1884. For hundreds of years, the cathedral held one of the four remaining copies of the original Magna Carta, now securely displayed in Lincoln Castle. The cathedral is the fourth largest in the UK in floor area, at around 5,000 square meters, 54,000 square feet after Liverpool, St. Paul's, and York Minster. It is highly regarded by architectural scholars. The Victorian writer John Ruskin declared, I have always held that the Cathedral of Lincoln is out and out the most precious piece of architecture in the British Isles and roughly speaking worth any two other cathedrals we have. History Remigius the Fecamp, the first bishop of Lincoln, moved episcopal seat cathedral there sometime between 1072 and 1092. About this, James Essex writes that Remigius laid the foundations of his cathedral in 1072. It is probable that he, being a normal, employed normal masons to superintend the building through though he could not complete the whole before his death. Before that, writes B. Winkles, it is well known that Remigius appropriated the parish church of St. Mary Magdalene in Lincoln, although it is not known what use he made of it. Up until then, St. Mary's Church in Stowe was considered to be the mother church in Lincolnshire, although it was not a cathedral because the seat of the diocese was at Dorchester Abbey, in Dorchester on Thames, Oxfordshire. However, Lincoln was more central to a diocese that stretched from the Thames to the Humber. Remigius built the first Lincoln Cathedral on the present site, finishing it in 1092 and then dying on 7th May of that year, 2 days before it was consecrated. In 1124, the timber roofing was destroyed in a fire. Alexander, Bishop, 1123 to 48, rebuilt and expanded the cathedral, but it was mostly destroyed by an earthquake. About 40 years later, in 1185, dated by the British Geological Survey as occurring 15 April 1185, the earthquake was on one of the largest felt in the UK. It has an estimated magnitude of over 5. The damage to the cathedral is thought to have been very extensive. The cathedral is described as having split from top to bottom. In the current building, only the lower part of the west end and its two attached towers remain of the pre-earthquake cathedral. Some Kitson 1986, Wu 1991 have suggested that the damage to Lincoln Cathedral was probably exacerbated by poor construction or design, with the actual collapse most probably caused by a vault failure. After the earthquake, a new bishop was appointed. He was Hugh de Burgundy of Avalon, France, who became known as Saint Hugh of Lincoln. He began a massive rebuilding and expansion program, with his appointment of William de Montibus as master of the cathedral school and chancellor. Lincoln briefly became one of the leading educational centers in England, producing writers such as Samuel Presbyter and Richard of Wetheringsett, though it declined in importance after William's death in 1213. Rebuilding began with the choir, St. Hugh's Choir, and the eastern transepts between 1192 and 1210. The central nave was then built in the early English Gothic architectural style. Lincoln Cathedral soon followed other architectural advances of the time. Pointed arches, flying buttresses, and ribbed vaulting were added to the cathedral. This allowed support for incorporating larger windows. There are 13 bells in the southwest tower, 2 in the northwest tower, and 5 in the central tower, including Great Tom accompanying the cathedral's large bell. Great Tom of Lincoln is a quarter-hour striking clock. The clock was installed in the early 19th century. The two large stained glass rose windows, the matching Dean's Eye and Bishop's Eye, were added to the cathedral during the late Middle Ages. The former Dean's Eye in the north transept dates from the 1192 rebuild begun by St. Hugh, finally being completed in 1235. The latter, the Bishop's Eye in the south transept, was reconstructed 100 years later in 1330. A contemporary record, The Metrical Life of St. Hugh, refers to the meaning of these two windows, one on the arc north side and the other on the light south side of the building, for north represents the devil and south the Holy Spirit, and it is in these directions that the two eyes look. The bishop faces the south in order to invite in, and the dean the north in order to shun. The one takes care to be saved, the other takes care not to perish. With the eyes, the cathedral's face is on watch for the candelabra of heaven and the darkness of let the oblivion. After the addition of Dean's eye and other major Gothic additions, it is believed some mistakes in the support of the tower occurred, for in 1237 the main tower collapsed. A new tower was soon started, and in 1255 the cathedral petitioned Henry III to allow them to take down part of the town wall to enlarge and expand the cathedral, including the rebuilding of the central tower and spire. They replaced the small rounded chapels built at the time of St. Hugh with the larger east end to the cathedral. This was to handle the increasing number of pilgrims to the cathedral who came to worship at the shrine of Hugh of Lincoln. In 1290, Eleanor of Castile died, and King Edward I of England decided to honor her. His queen consort with an elegant funeral procession after her body had been embalmed, which in the 13th century involved evisceration. Eleanor's viscera were buried in Lincoln Cathedral, and Edward placed a duplicate of the Westminster Abbey tomb there. The Lincoln's tomb original stone chest survives. Its effigy was destroyed in the 17th century and replaced with a 19th century copy. On the outside of Lincoln Cathedral are two prominent statues, often identified as Edward and Eleanor. But these images were heavily restored in the 19th century, and they were probably not originally intended to depict the couple. Between 1307 and 1311, the central tower was raised to its present height of 271 feet, 83 meters. The western towers and front of the cathedral were also improved and heightened. At this time, a tall lead encased wooden spire topped in the central tower, but was blown down in a storm in 1548. With its spire, the tower reputedly reached a height of 525 feet, 160 meters, which would have made it the world's tallest structure, surpassing the Great Pyramid of Giza, which held a record for almost 4,000 years. Although still doubted, this is the height agreed upon by the majority of historians. Other additions to the cathedral at this time included its elaborate carved screen and the 14th century missary cord, as was the angel choir. For a large part of the length of the cathedral, the walls have arches in relief, with a second layer in front to give the illusion of a passageway along the wall. Passageway along the wall. However, the illusion does not work, as the stonemason copying techniques from France did not make the arches the correct length needed for the illusion to be effective. In 19th In 1398, John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford founded a chantry in the cathedral to pray for the welfare of their souls. In the 15th century, the building of the cathedral turned to chantry or memorial chapels. The chapels next to the angel choir were built in the perpendicular style, with an emphasis on strong vertical lines, which survive today in the window tracery and wall paneling. Magna Carta. Hugh of Wells, Bishop of Lincoln, was one of the signatories to Magna Carta, and for hundreds of years the cathedral held one of the four remaining copies of the original, now securely displayed in Lincoln Castle. The Lincoln Magna Carta was on display at the British Pavilion during the 1939 New York World's Fair. In March 1941, the Foreign Office proposed that the Lincoln Magna Carta be gifted to the United States, citing the many thousands of Americans who waited in long queues to view it, and the U.S. passage of the Lend-Lease Act, among other reasons. In 2009, the Lincoln Magna Carta was lent to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. There are three other surviving copies, two at the British Library and one at Salisbury Cathedral. Little Saint Hugh. In August 1255, the body of an 8-year-old boy was found in a well in Lincoln. He had been missing for nearly a month. This incident became the source of a blood libel in the city, which Jews accused of his abduction, torture, and murder. Many Jews were arrested and 18 were hanged. The boy became known as Little Saint Hugh to distinguish him from Saint Hugh of Lincoln, but he was never officially canonized. The cathedral benefited from these events because Hugh was seen as martyr, and many devotees came to the city and cathedral to venerate him. Geoffrey Chaucer mentions the case in the Prioress' Tale, and a ballad was written about it in 1783. In 1955, a plaque was put up near the remains of the shrine of Little Saint Hugh in the cathedral that decries the trumped up stories of ritual murders of Christian boys by Jewish communities. Features Lincoln Imp. One of the stone carvings within the cathedral is the Lincoln Imp. There are several variations of the legend surrounding the figure. According to 14th century legend, two mischievous imps were sent by Satan to do evil work on earth. After causing mayhem elsewhere in northern England, the two imps headed to Lincoln Cathedral, where they smashed tables and chairs and tripped up the bishop. An angel appeared to the angel choir and ordered them to stop. One of the imps sat atop a stone pillar and started throwing stones at the angel, whilst the other cowered under the broken tables and chairs. The angel turned the first imp to stone, allowing the second imp to escape. The imp that turned to stone can still be found sitting atop his stone column in the angel choir. They also are one of the many carved animals on the structure. Ren Library. The Ren Library houses a rare collection of over 277 manuscripts, including the text of the Venerable Bede. Rose windows. Lincoln Cathedral features two major rose windows, which are highly uncommon feature among medieval architecture in England. On the north side of the cathedral there is the Dean's Eye, which survives from the original structure of the building, and on the south side there is the Bishop's Eye, which was most likely rebuilt circa 1325 to 1350. The south window is one of the largest examples of curvilinear tracery seen in medieval architecture. Curvilinear tracery is a form of tracery where the patterns are continuous curves. This form was often done within pointed arches and squared windows because those are the easiest shapes. So the circular space of the window was a unique challenge to the designers. A solution was created that called for the circle to be divided into smaller shapes that would make it simpler to design and create. Curves were drawn within the window, which created four distinct areas of the circle. This made the spaces within the circle where the tracery would go much smaller and easier to work with. This window is also interesting and unique in that the focus of the tracery was shifted away from the center of the circle and instead placed in other sections. The glazing of the window was equally difficult as the tracery for many of the same reason. Therefore, the designers made a decision to cut back on the amount of iconography within the window. Most cathedral windows during this time displayed many colorful images of the Bible. However, at Lincoln there are very few images. Some of those images that can be seen within the window include Saints Paul, Andrew, and James. Vaults. One major architectural feature of Lincoln Cathedral are the spectacular vaults. The varying vaults within the cathedral are said to be both original and experimental. The vaults especially clearly define the experimental aspect seen at Lincoln. There are several different kinds of vaults that differ between the nave, aisle, choir, and chapels of the cathedral. Along the north aisle there is a continuous ridge rib with a regular arcade that ignores the base. Meanwhile, on the south aisle there is a continuous ridge rib that puts an emphasis on each separate bay. The northwest chapel has quadripartite vaults, and the south chapel has vaults that stem from one central support columns. The use of sexpartite vaults allowed for more natural light to enter the cathedral through the clerestory windows, which were placed inside of each separate bay. St. Hugh's choir exhibits extremely unusual vaults. It is a series of asymmetrical vaults that appear to almost be a diagonal line, created by two ribs on one side translating into only a single rib on the other side of the vault. This pattern divides up the space of the vaults in the base, perfectly placing the emphasis on the base. The chapter house vaults are also interesting. It is a decagonal building with a single central column that 20 ribs rise from. Each separate area of Lincoln can be identified solely by the different vaults of the space. Each vault or each variation of the vault is fresh and original. The vaults are attributed to French Norman master mason Geoffrey de Noyer. De Noyer was succeeded by Alexander the Mason, who developed the nave's more elaborate but symmetrical tierceron vaulting, the crossing vaulting, Galilei porch, and western facade screen. Tower clock, a clock by John Thwalt, was installed in the northwest tower in 1775. This was later improved by Benjamin Vulliamy and moved to the broad tower around 1835. It was replaced in 1880 by a new clock built by Potts and Sons of Leeds. Under the instruction of Edmund Beckett QC, Cambridge chimes were a feature of the new clock. The machinery, featuring a double three-legged gravity escapement to Beckett's designs, weighs about 4 long tons, 4.5 short tons, with the driving weights being 1.5 long tons, 1.7 short tons, suspended by steel wire ropes 270 feet, 82-meter long, and the pendulum weight of 2 long hundredweight 100 kilogram. The beat is 1.5 seconds. The hour hammer is 224 pounds, 102 kilograms, striking upon great tom. The striking trains require winding daily. When done manually, it took 20 minutes. The going train required winding twice per week. The clock mechanism contains the inscription Quod bene vortas Deo opt max, Consulis Edmundi Becket, Baronetti, LLD, Opera Gul, Potz et Filiorum, Civium Leo Diensium, Subtibus Decani et Capituli, Novum interi positum est horologium. Bells. The southwest tower of the cathedral contains a fine ring of 13 bells, all cast by John Taylor and Co. in Loughborough. The Beck 8 bells were cast in 1913, with 4 new trebles being added in 1927. In 1948, a flat sixth was added to allow for ringing on the middle 8 bells. The treble bell weighs 5 cwt 0 qr 2 pounds, with the tenor weighing 3 cwt 3 qr 23 pounds and striking the note D, nominal 600 Hz. The bells are rung from the section of the tower just above the great west front, with the ringing chamber having 3 windows on all but one side. The bells themselves are hung below the Louvre to minimize tower movement as much as possible. Modern history. Wartime history. Lincolnshire was home to many bomber command airfields during the Second World War. giving rise to the nickname of Bomber County. The station badge for the nearby RAF Weddington depicts Lincoln Cathedral rising through the clouds until the opening of the RAF Bomber Command Memorial in 2012. The cathedral had the only memorial in the United Kingdom dedicated to Bomber Command's large losses of aircrew in the Second World War. During the war, priceless British treasures were placed in a chamber 60 feet beneath the cathedral for safekeeping. This did not include the cathedral's copy of the Magna Carta as it was on loan in the United States. Continuing for part 2.